Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a document here, a vision for Nigeria's promised land. And right from the start, it really confronts you with a stark reality.
Yeah, it opens by talking about just the heartbreaking tragedy of Nigerians risking everything, to leave the country.
Desperately seeking a better life and often dying in places like the Mediterranean, Libya, the North African desert. It just immediately tells you this vision isn't like an academic exercise.
Absolutely not. It feels born out of a profound sense of urgency and, well, human cost.
Exactly. That opening really hammers home the gravity, doesn't it? It sets the stage for why they feel such an, frankly, audacious vision is needed.
It's presented as a direct response to that desperation, that struggle.
And the document presents itself as exactly that, a direct response. It's framed as a group of Nigerians sharing their deep concerns and specifically proposing what they call a pathway to the promised land.
And they don't leave that term vague, which I think is crucial here. Based on the source, the promised land isn't just some abstract hope. It's defined as achieving a quality of life in Nigeria that is at par or better than that in the advanced world for every Nigerian in Nigeria.
That's a very concrete and, wow, incredibly ambitious benchmark.
It really is. It sets a monumental goal.
So our deep dive today is dedicated to exploring this particular vision, the one presented in this document. We want to understand, how they diagnose Nigeria's problems, why they believe previous efforts haven't quite worked, and the specific pathway they're proposing to achieve this big goal.
What can we really learn from their perspective on these challenges and, crucially, the solutions straight from the source?
Yeah. Okay. So one of the fascinating places they start their diagnosis is not just with, say, external problems, but with what they see as a crisis of belief within the country.
Right. The source notes that after, 64 years of different regimes and repeated dashed hopes, many Nigerians have simply lost faith that the problems are even solvable anymore.
That feeling of hopelessness really comes through. And they use this powerful analogy from the Bible.
The Joshua and Caleb one.
Yeah, comparing it to that story where only those two believed they could actually take the promised land. Everyone else felt too small, the challenge is too big, the enemy's too strong.
And the source suggests many Nigerians feel that same sense of being overwhelmed, kind of defeated today.
And that sense of being overwhelmed leads straight into their critique of, well, the common approach they observe. The source argues that while there's plenty of complaining about problems, and let's be honest, there's a significant lack of practical solutions being offered up.
Yeah, their core contention here seems to be that, quote, visions and ideas are what saves nations, not criticisms and complaints, which is a pretty bold statement.
It is, and this critique leads them to ask a really interesting question. Who should be creating this vision anyway? They really challenge the conventional idea that it has to come from political leaders already in power.
And they back this up with some, really potent historical examples. They point out that figures like Mahatma Gandhi, MLK Jr., Nelson Mandela, none of them were heads of state when they initiated massive change.
Exactly. They weren't in office. And they dig even deeper, referencing the poor wise man from Ecclesiastes.
Right, whose wisdom saved his city, but he wasn't remembered.
Yeah, and they also highlight people like John Houphouët, who pushed the crucial lunar orbit rendezvous concept for Apollo, or Hjalmar Schacht, who devised the MIVO bill system for Germany's economy in the 30s.
These were people outside the usual power structures, weren't they? Like technical experts or visionaries providing critical solutions without necessarily seeking glory.
So is the source suggesting that maybe waiting for leaders to provide the vision is actually part of the problem? That the vision needs to bubble up from elsewhere?
That definitely seems to be the implication. That the expectation itself might be misplaced, and the necessary vision could, or perhaps should, come from outside the political elite.
Okay. Now, the document also dives into what it argues is the fundamental economic problem, and it uses some truly striking numbers to make its point.
Yeah, the numbers are quite stark. They lay out a comparison between Nigeria today and 1974, which they describe as like the peak of economic prosperity then.
Right. 80% of government revenue still comes from oil exports, but get this, production has actually dropped by 30%, from 2.3 million barrels per day back then to around 1.6 million today.
So a significant decrease in the primary revenue source.
A 30% drop in the main income stream. And here's the kicker, they state Nigeria's day-to-day expense needs have grown by an absolutely astonishing 7,800% since 1974.
7,800%.
Yeah.
That number alone is just staggering.
It really is. And they explain the drivers, right? The population quadrupled 61 million to 233 million.
Wow.
The number of states tripled, 12 to 36. Local governments more than doubled, 299 to 774, and universities. They exploded from just 4 to 274. That's a 69-fold increase.
So their calculation adds all that up to a total 78-fold increase in monetary needs.
So you've got 78 times the needs.
But 30% less revenue from the main source. That discrepancy is just, central to their whole diagnosis.
It paints a picture of a structural economic reality that seems almost impossible to overcome with the current revenue base.
And they use a comparison that really brings this home for you. Nigeria's national budget, right, converted to U.S. dollars, is actually less than the budget of the province of Ontario in Canada.
Ontario, with a population of 16 million.
Exactly. 16 million versus Nigeria's 233 million. Ontario's population is just 7% of Nigeria's, yet its budget is larger. That single comparison just highlights the sheer scale of the economic challenge the source is describing.
Wow. Okay, that puts the numbers into a really, really stark perspective. So given that economic reality, what's the source's core conclusion?
Their conclusion is, well, blunt, and they call it inconvenient. They argue that with this level of revenue, it's mathematically impossible for any government on Earth to guarantee that high quality of life they defined.
That at par or better than the advanced world one.
Precisely. Impossible to guarantee that, even if, and this is key, even if 0% of the revenue was lost to corruption.
That framing around corruption is interesting, isn't it? They don't ignore it.
No, not at all. They acknowledge the UN stat, about 5% of global GDP being lost to corruption. But they argue that because Nigeria's GDP is currently so small, that same level of corruption accounts for a disproportionate 27% of Nigeria's GDP.
Oh, okay. So the impact is magnified because the overall pie is smaller.
Exactly. They contend that in a much larger economy, that percentage would naturally be much lower, maybe closer to the global average of 6%. And this is a key part of their argument.
Which is?
They believe that significantly increasing quality of life is actually the mechanism that will significantly reduce corruption, not the other way around. They kind of flip the usual cause and effect.
Interesting. So based on this diagnosis, the source is also pretty clear about what won't fix the problem, right?
Oh yeah, they list these explicitly. Stopping corruption alone won't solve the core economic challenge. Breaking up the country into separate regions won't solve it.
Military takeover.
Won't solve it. And they state emphatically that getting rid of any particular ethnic group won't solve it either. These are presented almost as distractions from the real issue.
And the real issue, the inconvenient truth, according to this source.
It's fundamentally economic. Nigeria needs to multiply its GDP by 11-folds.
11-fold. Okay, that's not marginal growth. That's like exponential transformation we're talking about.
Absolutely. And this leads to where the vision gets really interesting, I think, because the source places the blame for the current state not on individuals or groups, but squarely on the system.
This is probably their most provocative argument. They argue forcefully that the system is to blame, not the people, not the elite, not religion, ethnic groups, immigrants, or even former colonial masters. They see the system itself as fundamentally broken.
And they use this powerful, almost heartbreaking analogy to illustrate the point about the system.
Which one?
They describe a Nigerian worker who is, say, very corrupt back home,
Okay,
but becomes an angel and an award winner when they get a good job abroad. And conversely, an award-winning, high-integrity Nigerian worker abroad who returns home becomes corrupt when they start working within the system there.
So the environment, the system, changes the behavior.
That's their interpretation, that the system in Nigeria currently punishes honesty and rewards dishonesty. People, being rational, just adapt to the incentives of whatever system they're in.
So if the system is designed poorly, it'll produce undesirable outcomes, regardless of the inherent character of the individuals within it. That's a heavy thought.
It really is.
Okay, so their diagnosis. Deep systemic economic challenge, massive revenue versus needs mismatch. The system itself incentivizes negative behavior, makes high quality of life impossible right now, even without corruption. Wow.
Yeah, it's a challenging picture.
But having laid all that out, the source doesn't just stop there, right? They pivot to their proposed pathway, the solution they're offering.
Exactly. Their stated goal is to move beyond just identifying the problem and point directly to an actionable solution.
And they see the global context as shifting in a way that actually creates an opportunity. They talk about the end of what they call hard power.
Right. The use of force, bullying, threats, pointing to failures or limitations in places like Vietnam, Afghanistan, Ukraine as examples.
And in its place, they see the rise of soft power.
Influence, persuasion, the strategic use of benefits to get others to willingly give you what you want by making it advantageous for them.
Okay.
They give examples like Otto von Bismarck unifying Germany through diplomacy and incentives, NATO's endurance based on shared interests, President Obasanjo successfully negotiating Nigeria's debt relief.
Right, I remember that.
And the UAE using soft power to attract massive investment and talent to Dubai. It's about attraction, not coercion.
Okay, so connecting this global shift back to Nigeria, they view the country as being at a critical juncture. In great peril, they say.
Yeah, due to widespread hunger, poverty, and the associated risks to its democracy.
And they link this internal peril to the global stage. They argue that the advanced G7 countries are maybe losing some global influence due to their own challenges, aging populations, debt.
And simultaneously, they see China and Russia actively making inroads in Africa. They cite instances like France losing influence in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, where military takeovers have led to new alignments.
So they see Nigeria's internal crisis as a potential risk to global democratic order and stability, using the image of, like, protesters waving Russian flags during hardship as a symptom.
That seems to be the connection they're drawing, which leads to this interesting perspective on international relations. They draw a bold analogy.
To the Marshall Plan.
Exactly, post-World War II. They argue that for the sake of world peace and order, the U.S. and its Western allies need to engage with Nigeria, similarly, provide economic partnership to nurse its economy back to health.
The goal being to keep Nigeria a stable democracy and a reliable economic partner in this shifting global landscape.
That's the idea presented. And they explicitly warn the U.S. that an America First policy that ignores these dynamics risks its own global influence, implying that investing in Nigeria's stability is actually a strategic necessity for the West.
Interesting framing. Now, shifting from the global back to Nigeria's internal strengths, the source identifies what they believe is Nigeria's most unique and valuable asset.
Yeah, they contend that Nigeria has the best quality population in the world, and the primary reason, its exceptionally large percentage of youth.
So the youth bulge isn't just a challenge, it's an asset.
They see this youthful energy and potential as an unmatched asset that differentiates Nigeria globally.
That's a powerful reframing. And based on this, they propose what they call the big three critical items Nigeria needs to acquire.
Economic power, industrial power, and population.
Okay, the big three. How do they see Nigeria getting these?
Well, they explain that the first two, economic and industrial power, can potentially be acquired relatively quickly. They suggest this could happen by strategically borrowing funds, maybe even acquiring or buying industries.
Rather than building everything from scratch within current limits.
Sort of, yeah. While the third item, population, specifically that vibrant youth, is the asset Nigeria already possesses in abundance.
And combining these elements leads to their incredibly audacious time-bound goal. We mentioned it earlier.
Yeah. Their vision calls for Nigeria to not just improve, but to completely pull out of the mint group of emerging economies.
Leapfrog BRICS.
Dramatically leapfrog over the BRICS group and position itself squarely in the middle of the G7 group of advanced economies.
Within just 10 years.
Within 10 years. It's a monumental target, directly tied back to that 11-fold GDP increase they mentioned.
And tied into this ambition is their strong stance against calls for regional breakups, like Biafra or Oduwa proposals.
Right. What's their core argument against breaking up? Why is size so crucial to this vision?
They contend that breaking up would fundamentally weaken Nigeria, pushing any resulting smaller nations to the absolute bottom globally, stripping them of size, influence, relevance.
And they argue further that it would crush the hopes of Africans globally.
Okay.
Because in their view, Nigeria and South Africa are currently presented as the only African countries with any seat at the G7 BRICS Mint tables.
So Nigeria's continued existence and success as a large unified entity is, in their view, tied to collective African aspirations.
That's the argument they make. It sounds like they're really trying to offer a pathway that avoids the pitfalls and conflicts of past approaches.
Yes, they position this vision as unique, partly because it aims to offer a roadmap that benefits everyone, both the masses and the leaders.
How so?
By providing a detailed plan, they aim to take the burden of creating such a complex vision off politicians, who are often busy with day-to-day governance. They also emphasize they don't see leaders as adversaries, but rather as being in the same boat as everyone else, needing a clear way forward. And they connect this national vision back to the individual Nigerian on a very personal level. They argue that even the most successful Nigerian abroad only gets, say, 1/3 of the potential respect they could have.
Just from personal achievement.
Right. The other two-thirds, they say, comes from the exploits of your country and the collective reputation of your race.
Ah, the collective prestige.
Exactly. Their vision aims to provide that missing collective prestige, elevating every Nigerian globally, not just through individual success, but through the success and reputation of the nation itself.
Which circles back powerfully to the source's concluding point, reinforcing why vision is so fundamental.
Yeah, they end by stating, where there is no vision, people perish.
They see vision as the ultimate driver. It provides meaning, gives people something vital to live and fight for beyond just survival.
A lack of vision, they argue, leads directly to casting off restraint and can explain much of the turmoil we see globally.
And they believe vision is the transformative force required to change systems, especially when those systems have reached their limits, their end of life, so to speak.
Which brings us right back to their core argument. The system itself is the problem.
And this kind of powerful shared vision is what's needed to fix it.
Precisely. Their vision is presented as the mechanism to repair that broken system, to create a new frontier that will fundamentally transform the people within it and make Nigeria mighty in its youth and powerful in its purpose. So, to bring together the key takeaways from this document, a vision for Nigeria's promised land, it presents a compelling case that Nigeria faces this critical, fundamentally economic challenge.
Driven by that massive revenue deficit relative to needs, requiring that almost unthinkable 11-fold GDP increase.
And they argue the pathway isn't in blame or breakup, but in embracing a powerful collective vision led by the people, leveraging soft power.
And focusing squarely on fixing the underlying system that they believe holds everyone back.
So this deep dive has given you a direct look into that specific perspective, exploring the arguments, the numbers, the ambitious goals laid out right there in the source document itself.
Yeah, it provides you with a shortcut, really, to understanding this particular, very well-articulated viewpoint on Nigeria's complex challenges and its bold proposed solutions.
And building on their central argument that the system is to blame, not the people, and that it's a vision that changes systems when they've reached their limit, it kind of leaves us with a question to consider, doesn't it? What systems in your own life, maybe your community, or even on a broader scale, might be holding people back, regardless of their individual efforts? And what kind of powerful vision, what new frontier might be needed to create transformative change in those systems?